Okay, we're out here at SPE. We've got the car back on the hub dyno, and we have changed up our setup. We've gone to a small bowl piston, we've gone to a 6.7 143 degree injector, and we have a air-to-water intercooler that we fabbed up into the intake. Pretty different from what we've been used to without running any intercooler and turning water injection off. So we're just going back through our data. We made one run. We did 2020 horsepower on fuel only. That was at 400 milligrams, which in OEM ECM turns, it's about 920 microseconds. With low timing, that's like about 25 degrees at 5,000 RPM. And now we're gonna turn on 2 kits of nitrous and see how much power that increases and what it does to our air-fuel ratio, what our intake air temp before and after the cooler does, and what boost pressure does. We have the trans brake disabled, and he basically grabs the button and that holds it on the RPM limiter, and when he throws his hand, we start the dyno run, and it runs it through all 5 gears including lockup, and then we lift. Okay, that run made 2657 horsepower and 3,085 foot-pounds of torque. So we picked up 630 horsepower, and our EGTs actually dropped about 50 degrees. We went from 20-to-1 air-fuel ratio to 26-to-1 air-fuel ratio. So now we're going to leave fuel quantity alone again, and we're going to add the third kit, which will make it even leaner, and we'll see if we can still continue to add horsepower and lower our temperatures. How's that feel, Lars?
Fantastic.
Okay, that last run made 2,861 horsepower and 3,145 foot-pounds of torque. We're now back at Firepunk, and I was able to go back over this data and give you more information. So I kind of wanted to lay out this board so we can start seeing the comparisons between each run. This is going to be kind of a deeper dive into some of the data and the things that we see and why we're making the changes and what we're learning in the process. So I wanted you guys to be able to follow along. If this stuff interests you, I hope it can help you guys advance your diesel racing program, because we have spent a lot of time and torn up a lot of parts, and if I can help other people, then that's awesome, because I don't want anybody else to have to spend as much money as we have tearing stuff up. But if you want to try to find the next level, it's really the only way to do it is go back to the dyno and you run it until it's broken, and then you try to make it better and do it again. So that last run was 2,861 horsepower. The second run was 2,657, and the first run was 2020. And that was fuel only, kits 1 and 2, and kits 1, 2, 3, and 4. And all 3 of these runs were 405 milligrams of fuel. That's total fuel quantity per shot, which is about 920 microseconds. A 90% timing split. I'll go over that here in a little bit. And 200 MPa. And you can see the differences in these temperatures. Knock this thing over. Boost temperature before the intercooler was 207 degrees with fuel only. It dropped to 190 with 2 kits of nitrous introduced into the air, and it dropped all the way to 153 with 3 kits of nitrous. So you're flooding the air with that really cold nitrous, and it's dropping the temperature before it ever gets to the intercooler, and that helps your after intercooler air density. So it went from 114 after the air-to-water intercooler on fuel only to 107, then all the way down to 96 degrees. And then you also see the air-fuel ratio as we increase nitrous. This is all same fuel quantity, 20-to-1, 26-to-1, and then 40-to-1 on that last pass. And then look what it did to our EGTs. Went from 1750 to 1675, all the way down to 1450. So we picked up 840 horsepower and dropped 300 degrees EGTs. And the engine sounds 100% happy. So running it lean is cool. Lean is mean. We definitely learned that. But there's a point where you can't get more boost and more nitrous in it, and then you have to start adding fuel again and bring that air-fuel ratio down. Peak boost, 86 PSI, 99 PSI, 110 PSI. Drive pressure was 78 PSI, 94, and 104. Turbo shaft speed, you see the increase as we add nitrous, 99,000, 109,000, 111,000 shaft speed. So overall, very happy with these numbers. The next run, what we did is we took the fuel quantity from 405 and added 50 milligrams, which went from about 920 US to about 1140 because we left rail pressure at 200 MPa. Let's look at this next run at 455 milligram with timing still the same. That really brought the timing split down to about a 78%. And let's see what that data looks like. Okay, that run made 2986 horsepower and 3375 torque. And here is the data. It made 174 degrees temperature before the intercooler, and you can see turbo shaft speed went from 111 up to 117. When that turbo spins faster, it makes more compressor outlet temperature, and that's what drives that temperature up. But boost after the intercooler was still down at 103. They brought our air-fuel ratio down to 28:1, which is likely, I mean, obviously we just added 50 milligrams of fuel and didn't change timing, so that's normal. EGTs went back to 1750, peak boost was 112, and peak drive was 103. For the next run, we're going to take this timing split and bump it up to 85%, which is going to add about 2 degrees of timing through the whole curve. And we're going to take rail pressure up to 220 MPa, which will bring this down to like 1,070 US. Okay, that run did 3,238 horsepower and 3,618 foot-pounds of torque. So huge difference just by putting a little bit of timing in it. We also shortened the injector pulse width by increasing the pressure from 200 MPa to 220. But looking at the data, obviously air-fuel ratio is the same. We adjusted the external wastegate open a little bit further on that run, and you can see it slowed the turbo down. And it also dropped my temperatures just a little bit. EGTs were very similar. I mean, picking up 200 some horsepower and only picking up 25 degrees EGTs is good. But I think the main gains that we saw there were from the injection timing. Peak boost 113, peak drive is 101. Again, we opened the gate a little bit further. Really happy with those numbers. The last run, the only change we made was go from 85% timing split back to a 90% timing split, which pretty much put 1 degree in from 4,000 RPM to 6,500 RPM across the whole curve. So we'll make that last run, see what we got. Okay, on that run we did 3209. We actually lost a little bit of horsepower, about 29 horsepower and 3,579 torque, but our numbers were still very similar. EGTs did drop, which some of that is if you increase timing, you're keeping more of your fuel burning in your cylinder before, it's not going to open the exhaust valve quite as soon. 112 pounds of boost, 98 pounds of drive, and 114. I again put another couple percent in the E-gate to try to relieve it, so I'm still in control. I think we're like 5,800 RPM, and I'm running the single Turbo Smart 50 millimeter E-gate at about 74%. So I still have some good capacity on that single gate to be able to slow the turbo down if I need to. But overall, this number dropped, and that generally tells you that it didn't like the timing. One thing that we did see on this run was that our crankcase pressure picked up to 5 psi, and that is generally a bad sign. So after the run, I don't know if you see on the video, you see some steam coming out of the trunk area. So that made us, the engine still sounded good, it ran good, but I didn't want to keep beating on this thing if it had a ring going away or anything like that. And so we stopped the dyno run at that point and went back home and tore it back apart. And what we found is one of the second rings, the total seals had actually started delaminating, or basically started torching almost. Was not bad. All the other cylinders looked absolutely perfect. The engine looked better than it's ever had. Cylinder walls look great. We didn't have ballooning in the tops of the sleeves like we had before. And we believe that the problem that we had with the ring was a lot in our break-in procedure, which is something that we messed up. When we first started this thing, we had some oil pressure issues because we had forgotten to change the clear view screen, and that was causing restrictions. Our oil pressure was low, and we drained the 30 weight break-in oil out of it and put Hot Shots 50 weight in it. And Hot Shots has FR3 friction reducer in it, and you're not supposed to put that in until you have the ring seated. But those are things that when it's midnight, the night before dyno, you don't always think as clearly as you should. So we made that mistake. We did the break-in with the FR3 in, and you can see little soot marks on some of the rings where it never looked like the ring's fully seated. So we're going to pretty much replace one sleeve, one piston in number 6 and go back together. But for right now, we're probably going to stick with a 85% timing split or less. That keeps it safer. Let's talk about timing split a little bit now. So this is a little bit of a crude illustration, but timing split, the main thought behind it is what percentage of your total fuel quantity that's being delivered per stroke is being injected before TDC. So if you're opening the injector at 25 degrees before TDC, your fuel quantity is going to come in and start increasing pressure as it burns, and then it's going to stop delivering fuel here. So if you have a 90% timing split, 90% of your fuel gets injected before TDC and 10% gets injected after TDC. Basically a calculation of your piston speed. So as your piston speed increases, your RPM goes up, you need to start starting the fuel injection further before TDC, because your piston's coming up to TDC faster and you need to get more of your fuel in quicker. And that's why on really high RPM, like racing, generally the more RPM we can run, the more versatility we have to gain RPM without making a bunch of torque. It's a lot easier to control the chassis if we have RPM, but to make horsepower at high RPM, you need a really fast injector to deliver a large fuel quantity before TDC. And what we believe was some of our problem in tearing up pistons was we were getting our fuel in before, but our main pressure spike, like if this is where we started injecting fuel, here's your ignition delay from the time it starts injecting till the time it starts combusting, then cylinder pressure starts to rise, and our peak cylinder pressure might look like this, and then it falls off, and as soon as the exhaust valve opens, it drops back off. This is kind of what your cylinder pressure would look like if you would just run your engine without any combustion happening. So it comes up, makes compression, but there's no combustion. And this is kind of what a cylinder pressure spike could look like on a high horsepower diesel, or any diesel, honestly. So as you increase your timing and bring your timing further back, this peak cylinder pressure happens closer to TDC, and that's when your piston is all the way up at the top where there's no room. And if your piston's straight up and all that pressure happens and it can't accelerate the crankshaft, all that heat release goes into the top of your piston, and we believe that was what was causing some of our piston erosion problems. Along with, there was a couple other things with being wide bowl and 5 holes has more direct, basically like a 0-degree pressure washer on the top of the injector, because the injector top of the piston gets so hot, and now that 5 holes has a really direct jet spray on the top of a hot aluminum piston and erodes the aluminum, kind of works like a torch. So what we're wanting to do is, by lowering timing, we were starting the injection here, but we're still getting a lot of fuel in, but it's making our peak ignition, peak cylinder pressure probably look more like this. And the spike is never as high, and it's further after TDC where the piston has relaxed a little bit. There's a little bit more room for combustion, and now it can accelerate the crankshaft a little bit more. So on that last run, we're not exactly sure if the ring was 100% at fault for not sealing correctly during the break-in procedure, or if we simply got peak cylinder pressure too close to TDC, which caused the ring pack to be overloaded with cylinder pressure. Either way, we're going to stay on the safe side when we go back out, and we're going to keep it at 85% split or lower for right now until we can go back to the engine dyno, because I'd much rather have an engine problem on the dyno than it's at the track. Because you're going 180 mile an hour and you make crankcase pressure and you blow oil out, you can wreck the car, and that is not ideal. So that is a little bit lesson of what timing split is. This is a timing split basing that your fuel is being delivered exactly when the solenoid is being charged on your injector. The next thing to consider is that your injector has a rate trace. So your rate trace is like, say this is the amperage, and then it comes down here. I don't know, it's kind of weird how it works. But let's say this is how long your solenoid is charged for 1100 US. And your rate trace is how much lift, like the actual rate of delivery. So the way different companies between Exergy, SNS, DDP, Flux, all those different companies, the rate traces are different based on how they build the nozzle and how they modify the injector body. So you might have an injector rate trace that looks something like this, and your actual end of injection is all the way out here at 2800 US of total on time. So all of this area underneath the curve is your total fuel rate per shot. So if you're only charging your solenoid for 1100 US at 200 MPa and measuring the fuel quantity, you might think you have a lot of fuel quantity in a short amount of time, but depending how you modify it, the injector shuts off here, but the pressure is holding the needle valve, the pintle open, and it has a really late end of injection. So what you want to know, if you don't know your rate trace, you don't really know what timing you need to have in your diesel. And that's why we've built a relationship with Exergy, because they give us this information. I know SNS will do the same thing, DDP will do the same thing. We could build a relationship with any of those companies and have no problems, but it is very important as a tuner, if you're making a lot of horsepower, that you build a relationship with your fuel shop, because if they can't get you this information, then you don't really know what timing you need to put in there to have an engine that lasts a long time. So what we want is we want a rate shape that goes up as quickly as possible, reaches peak pressure, and then when it shuts off, it comes down here. And you might still be 2000 US after, TDC, and that's even better than what a stock injector would be. So there's a lot of differences that happen in this rate shape that affect where your peak cylinder pressure is. And if you don't know where this is and you're trying to make 2,000, 3,000 horsepower, you can tear up engines repeatedly and not know why. And we are still kind of stuck in the mud of this. I have a pretty decent understanding in it, but I'm still hitting this kind of with a farm boy's thought process, like not with an engineer's thought process. If you talk to some of the guys at like Molly, when they do engineering for a new engine for Mercedes or Ferrari or anything like that, that engine will be in engineering for 6 years before it ever hits the showroom floor. We obviously don't have anywhere near that kind of budget to be able to do that kind of engineering on the computer to make sure that all our piston bolt, the injector combo, and airflow and swirl and everything is perfect before we even go build something. So we kind of have to just put something together that makes sense, use common sense, take it to the dyno, take it to the track, see what happens, and hope for the best. And that's why you see just going from 3,000 horsepower to 3,200 horsepower, you find new problems that you didn't have at 3,000, and going from 3,200 to 3,600, we'll find the same amount of problems. So as time goes on, we have learned a lot. I mean, look at where we're at in 2024. Diesel performance has come a long way in the last 10 years, and I'm hoping that we can just keep progressing this, because long term, I want to be able to take the Pro Mod and go to a traditional Pro Mod race that PDRA hosts or Snowbirds or something like that, and be able to make the field and actually be able to run in with some of those gas cars. But those guys are on the track every weekend. We're not. We got a business to run. It's kind of, racing is something we do for fun on the side, but we do also use it to educate ourselves, because all this data ends up making better parts for you guys as the end user. Even if you're building a 700 horsepower truck or 1,000 horsepower truck, we can make those trucks a lot more reliable with some of this information that we've learned playing at these higher levels. So hopefully this is some useful information for you guys. Our next event will be down at Florida, April 5th, racing the Pro Mod at the ODSS season opener. That's Orlando Truck Meet. Hope to see some of you guys there. We'll have our apparel trailer there. We got some of these new hats with the Firepunk, metal Firepunk logo, and we got a bunch of swag stuff coming out. So we hope to see you guys there. If not, you can jump on the website, pick any of that stuff up. But we'll see you guys later.